I had many meetings with central bankers, and I kept asking them, um, why don't you reflate the economy? It's not very difficult. They can quickly create demand and have a recovery, but they didn't do it. But then some central bankers took me aside and said, look, particularly, over dinner, it's all off the record. And they told me, look, of course we know we could do this. Of course, any central bank can quickly create a recovery. We know that. I mean, you can even create inflation if you want to. That's coming back to 2020 in a moment. But we don't want to. What do you mean you don't want to? Oh, wow. And so I still didn't believe it, though, when they told me. I mean, literally several central banks told me the story. I thought that must be some kind of crazy explanation of their mistakes. So I still worked on that basis. These are just mistakes. And the conclusion was that the banks were doing this lending for asset purchases at an extraordinary pace, enormous amounts of money being given to any company to purchase real estate. That was what was driving up the real estate prices to these extraordinary levels I mentioned, It was called guidance, window guidance, of increased bank lending now by this much, by that much, and there were huge numbers. And they have this power, and that power, that is an extraordinary power tool. Power, unfortunately, corrupts, and they have been abusing this power to create boom and bust cycles and business cycles. The ECB was given more powers than any other central bank. It was not accountable to any government. It wasn't accountable to any parliament. And it had all these powers. No public prosecutor can search the ECB. They can't be arrested for any crime. They're like above the law. Everyone is happy. They're having capital gains. Everyone thinks this is going great. It's a huge boom. But as soon as the central bank tells the banks to stop this, the asset bubble collapses and the banks are bust. And then the economies are bust. You basically have a huge recession. That's exactly what we had. And they called it the sovereign debt crisis in Europe. Well, basically it was Ireland, Portugal, Spain, and Greece, and some smaller countries where the ECB had boosted bank credit in the previous years for asset purchases massively, just like in Japan in the 80s. And now everyone was bust and the banking system was bust. And the central bank, the ECB, had the key to get out of this. And they used this to get political concessions. Central banks, unfortunately, have an incentive to create crises, because after each crisis, they claim, oh, it's because we don't have enough powers. And they're actually given more powers. And this has happened so many times. And I warned about this before the 2008 crisis. And what happened, of course, after the 2008 crisis, they were all given more powers. When we talk about 2020 and what they really want to do now with all this power, which gets really scary. With the introduction of the ECB, governments gave up their power to this international organization. The ECB is above all these countries. It's not accountable to any country. It's not accountable to any government. It's not accountable to any democratic assembly. No parliament in Europe. Politicians should really be made aware of this. We can have high, sustainable, equitable, non-inflationary growth, double-digit, 10% growth in almost all countries is possible, without inflation and without crisis, and very stable. They hired the likes of BlackRock to do this for them and just go out and purchase assets. And they used central bank money to fund this. Now that is direct money injection into the economy, and it was given to essentially asset owners and a whole lot of rich people, owners of some big businesses and financial players. And that was really what created this inflation. They did this globally by the fact that it was so coordinated. It's a very specific policy, that is very rarely taken. What they need is digital IDs. how do we introduce digital IDs? We need another excuse to do that. Well, the so-called pandemic delivered a great excuse. It wasn't really very convincing, but somehow they argued that you needed to be injected with this experimental substance, when of course it was very quickly clear that this injection was not actually slowing transmission. So the justification wasn't very strong, but they definitely pushed these digital IDs, the so-called vaccine passports, very hard, and again in a coordinated fashion. So you see where this is going. CBDCs connected to digital IDs. And that means we're talking about the most totalitarian control system in human history. Because this is a control tool that not only gives you, as a controller, complete visibility of what everyone is doing, every transaction. The money's moving from where to where, you know everything. But the monitoring is only one aspect. And of course, you can use that information for your purposes if you're the controller, the central planner. But actually, these CBDCs are programmable. And you can use tools, algorithms, big data algorithms, which they sell as artificial intelligence, in order to have rules about who can buy what for what purpose, at what time, and at what place, where, and therefore control your movement, control all your activities. And oh, Kim, you were critical of central banks recently. Oh, your CBDC is not working today, is it? Or you're trying to buy this book. Oh, you can buy another book, but not that one. That's a bit too critical of central banks. So you can see this. I mean, this in history, and also the human history of dictatorships, there's never been such a powerful control tool as they're about to introduce. And that is the big prize they're aiming for, I think.
That is really scary.